This is my Fulgora quality science island. It is self-sufficient and produces the equivalent of a full belt of uncommon or Q2 electromagnetic science, as well as any necessary Aquilo exports including Q2 holmium for equal parts of Q2 cryogenic science. Like most other solutions for uncommon electroscience, the basic flow here is quality mining and then using the quality components to create the science. But unlike most other solutions, the island has an unconventional method for voiding the byproducts of scrap recycling. Because, as you can see, there is a train. An 11 locomotive, no wagon train running on legendary rocket fuel. This train builds up enough speed around the corners to ram its way through up to 12 cars every horizontal side. That is the recycling strategy. Cars have 80 inventory slots, equivalent to 2 regular steel chests each. So if you set up the train right, you can void a huge amount of materials very quickly. And the reason this even works is that cars leave behind the ghosts, so if you have a replacement car in the network, then the construction bot will replace it for you. But why would you actually do this? Surely this cannot be better than just recycling the items away. Legendary recyclers are very fast. And yes, while this is correct, they are nowhere near this fast. This is basically instant, and you would need a ton of recyclers to handle the amount of different byproducts that this is creating. The Fulgora recycling pipeline differs based on what items you're avoiding. If you need to get rid of steel, you turn it into chests first, and then crunch that. If you need to get rid of chips, it could be like a 5 or 6 length long chain of recyclers. And if you try to reuse some recyclers for multiple products, you're on the risk of deadlocking them at some point in the future if you're not careful about the circuit carding or how you're inserting into them. So if I were to do this with recyclers instead, it would end up being much larger due to the amount of recyclers I would need. It could be brittle, and it would spend a lot more UPS on entities for inserting and like the recyclers themselves. And recyclers have been shown to be some of the more UPS intensive entities you can have running, and I'll get back to the UPS of this island later. Now, all that said, this is probably not an intended mechanic for recycling, and it's a strategy that comes with a couple of requirements that perhaps limits the general viability of it. Like, you need to build cars continuously, meaning you need steel, gears, and engines. This island alone consumes 8,000 cars every hour. And to ram this many cars, you also need space for a lot of locomotives, or you need to find some kind of midpoint where you also have quality fuel. On Fulgora here, with this setup, this is not a problem for cars. Each quadrant here makes engines, the slowest component for the cars. And using this, we make shared cars right here in the bus, and it's belted into the construction zone. This all uses gears and steel that's byproducts of Q1 scrap recycling, stuff that we don't have much use for anyway. And as for the fuel, the quality mining has a small chance of giving us legendary scrap, which we belt out here and scrap recycle into legendary solid fuel, which can give us the legendary rocket fuel. So while it is viable here, I'm not sure if this can generalize to ore voiding around ore upcycling areas in general, but it's certainly something that is worth experimenting with. So let's get into specifics about the production here. This island is comprised of 4 near identical quadrants, 2 at the top, 2 at the bottom. We quality mine into a central silo in each pair here, and then we sort the scrap quality with inserters. Q1 scrap is handled in the middle here for a shared variety uses. Q2 scrap is handled on the wide edges up here, and that's used to make the main science components. If we follow the quadrants to the end, you will see there are 2 fully beaconed EM plants making the science, running at 30.1 packs per second. So with 8 of these, that gives us just over a full belt of it. And to be able to satisfy the Q2 requirements for that, you do need a fair amount of Q2 scrap. This is all the Q2 scrap for this quadrant. And to be able to pull out, to have these guys running, you actually need to pull out a huge amount of Q1 scrap, because otherwise, because you always get out of balance. And just by counting the amount of legendary stack inserters here, you can tell that this is basically like up to 5 full belts of stuff being pulled out. So that's like 1200 items per second you need to be inserting into this silo. And that means your mining productivity needs to be fairly high. Like I'm at mining prod 5800 or something now. So that gives me 2200 per second. So that's way above what you need. But I do suspect you need to be around half of this, 2800 or something. If you have less than that, it's going to run at less speed. There's an older blueprint in here as well that has 2 miners. It's less efficient, but it's going to work with something over 1000 mining prod. Yeah, if you follow the Q2 scrap up here, it's just these 2 recyclers per quadrant that is in charge of it. And with it, we send the stuff that we want. We make extra batteries used for accumulators, superconductors, supercapacitors, and we also crush a couple of gears for extra iron. We crush some blue chips and LDS for plastic, greens, iron, and copper. But everything else is basically like that goes into this car is voided, and there's tons of leeway here. Like these cars are generally only half full. Oh, we also pull out the holmium and stone. Then the middle area with the 2 central silos, that's here to handle the Q1 scrap. All Q1 scrap gets directly scrap recycled into the cars, and then we pull out whatever we need of those components before the next train comes around and destroys everything. So effectively this whole middle area here acts as both a voiding area and an item type belt buffer for all miscellaneous needs. And I would say this is actually the most cursed part of this whole design here, because it's actually quite hard to pull out items from a car on a live train line. Because if the inserters are also in range of a train, then the inserters will shift focus to that train when it goes by, and that change does not revert. So you basically need to find an angle where the inserters does not also touch the train. And that is exactly why these cars are on such a weird angle. Like, you cannot place this down by hand as this, because there's no way you can get like this, or with a default orientation you cannot get this generous of an inserter coverage. Just by looking at the stuff that is highlighted here when I hover over this car, this is targeted by 6 inserters and 2 recyclers. And that's without like using the wide part of the car, the sides. This car was actually driven into the perfect pixel, and then we blueprinted it along with the train and various things to make sure like this is the perfect pixel orientation for it. And if we look at the actual inserters for it, we can see the first 4 inserters here are actually pointing away from the track to avoid a train, whereas the ones far away, they're able to somehow reach across this entire gap to pull out from them. So if you can handle these peculiarities of cars, you do end up with this extremely compact bus centered around what feels like somewhat bulky infinity chests that occasionally resets. On this bus in particular, we mostly pull out holmium and stone for like the liquids, pull out some metal for sulfur and also for the car components. We also pull out some rocket parts for exports and also for launches, obviously. We also crush some LDS. With the crushed components goes directly into a Q1 superconductor thing that is used to export for Promethean science. Oh, and a second cursed thing about cars, there's more. They also need to have a filter on the fuel, because if you didn't have that, then what would happen is you get solid fuel into the slot, and then when a car gets destroyed, the bots would complain that there's no solid fuel in the network to replace in the cars, and then you get lots of warnings. So that's why that's there. Now if we look at the main science area, there's also a couple of bonus tanks and cars around. These are basically long chests for us. We want a buffer in this place here, and this lets us transfer the accumulators directly with only 2 inserters and without losing max beaconing, which we do really need for this throughput. And then we have this particular tank here that stands in as a shared chest between 2 silos with only 3 inserters, so that's kind of nice. You also kind of struggle to pull out this much science from a single silo. That's why there's 2 here. So all of this is kind of just build convenience. I'm not sure if this has a particular overhead or not. The tanks in particular have their logistic network disabled, for what it's worth. But they come with some awkwardness. There's some awkwardness with the construction here, because depending on which one of the car and this beacon gets placed down first, this inserter might be stuck, depending on, as a result of that. I will show what I mean, because if I take this and place this back down, you can see this is now stuck. It's because it sees what's immediately left of it, there's something there, and it's a beacon, so it thinks somehow it's going to insert there. But if I take that away, it then recognizes the tank is there, and even if I place this beacon back down again, it's forever fixed. Holmium. The holmium production is also a bit unusual for Q2 islands, because we don't do any EM plant upcycling. This is because we have access to such a huge amount of holmium ore with this voiding setup that we can literally brute upcycle plates direct for less entity usage. It's only these 3 here per quadrant. And you can see even with an L2 speed module inside of this beacon here, we still have 21% quality running at 40 plates per second. And that is enough to power this quadrant, so there'll be 12 of these in total, to power this entire island, and that gives us enough to power all the science, as well as a full blade of a Q2 cryogenic science. We can look at the usage of that of holmium. 10-hour average holmium consumption, 856 Q2 holmium per minute. And if we look at the usage on Fulgora, we'll see that the production here is 18.8, and the island itself is pulling 17.9. So that's these 3 numbers match up. This production can actually go as high as 19, so there's a little slack here, but really not much. It's the holmium itself and the Q2 science that's the main product that we are scaling this island for. So the island's recycler time is tuned, so we only operate at a percentage of time to minimize the activity according to that. And you see there's no actual circuit networks for that, because the way this is controlled is actually via the train itself. You'll notice that the train, when it actually slows down, stops at these stations for a certain amount of time. And that time, if that is a high amount of time, I'll show here, this is 6 seconds and 5 seconds, so it's an 11-second total time. That means that these cars here are likely to fill up. This one is in fact full. So it means these guys here are going to backlog, and then that means this silo is backlogging, so it's not much science, and now we just came and destroyed it. So yeah, basically, if Q1 shuts down, then everything else kind of shuts down slowly over time as well. And during that time, the island basically operates on buffers for a while. So as long as we don't stop the train for as long as it will impact the science and holmium, this is fine. The 11 seconds was the most I could get away with. More than that, and you start seeing dips in Q2 batteries. There are also other products of the island itself, like obviously we're exporting superconductors for Promethean and Q1 holmium for Promethean, and rocket parts for Aquilo, but these are not really resource constrained. There are tons of these coming around. So the Q2 holmium export is pretty tight at the moment. It's basically exactly what I need. If you do need more, it is possible to put a Q3 speed module in here, and that will change this to be almost 60 plates per second at only a little over 2% drop in quality. So that should be slightly better, but you didn't mean to get more into this recycler, speed it up a little bit, and you need to get more holmium to be able to compensate for that. There used to be a 4th chem plant here for holmium, but I took that away because I thought I needed more engines, but now that I tuned down the engines, that's no longer needed. So you could in theory grab more holmium out of this island if you need to. But it's just something to be aware of. You need to make sure that the island is car positive in its production, because otherwise it will deadlock. If we want to get a look at the footprint in terms of scrap usage, we can look at the graphs for, it's right here, scrap usage. We are using, this is with 4 islands, 496,000 scrap per minute, and then the Q2 at 146. You can also see we're getting a little bit of legendary. And if we look at the long-term statistics here, these are kind of interesting, because back here is when I was running Hobbits Islands. I was running 10 of Hobbits Islands before, and then you can see I was using more scrap back then than I am now. These steps in between here is basically me optimizing the island to be tuned less and less, turning down the train speed, figuring out what the bottlenecks are, and improving it. So now it's somehow less Q1 scrap than that, and obviously we're also doing a little bit of Q2 scrap at that point. So that means that each of these islands uses a quarter of this, so it's going to be 124k Q1 scrap and 37k Q2 scrap per minute. And so each of these islands then can produce 4,750 Q2 holmium per minute, and that's 250 only as excess for exports, but that's all you need for a Q2 cryogenic. Layout-wise, there are 4 robot networks here. The one in the center takes construction bots, and then the 4 on the outside takes logistic bots. The 4 on the outside deals with the exports itself, so these are all fairly close to minimize the bot travel time. If they were all connected, they would exchange bots even though they didn't need to. And the cars here are just at the edge of the construction networks. This is all fairly standard. Then there are a couple of asymmetries, not many, but basically this bottom left quadrant here makes rocket fuel, so that means there's some slight differences here. This car needs to be at a weird angle, which means I can't have this third inserter here, so there's more going through here, which means this is a car rather than a chest. There's also a little bit of a rocket fuel export here for legendary rocket fuel. You can't pull too much of it, but if it's just for a small train network, it should be fine. And then for the quadrants itself, they are basically all the same apart from one. So you notice this inserter here. This is doing very fast rotation because it's coming down like this. That's generally the case for all of them, but it's not the case for this one. This one needs to do like a full rotation swing based on how it is, and I didn't manage to get a good way to get around that. And that means that the throughput going into this recycler is actually limited a little bit, and that makes this holmium deficient. So that's why there's this car here, to get extra stuff into this recycler. Oh, and by the way, the holmium stuff actually comes out of this car too. If there's any Q2 holmium, we pull that out. Any Q3 and above goes straight in the car. The excess from the LDS crushing that we don't need in the superconductors also goes in the car. So this is also kind of a special case car here. Now, as for the UPS itself, I'm happy to report that it has actually given me a fairly substantial relative improvement when replacing my Q1 Hobbit Island setup with 4 of these, which I have running here. 1, 2, 3, 4. It used to be 10 Hobbit Islands. And I'm happy because I have tested other Q2 setups in the past and unexpectedly got worse results than what I was running with Q1, even though they are much smaller. But because I think it's because they are more recycler heavy, because they deal with all the scrap in that way, and when you deal with Q2 you also get a lot more Q1. Now, to caveat before I give the numbers, I am only testing this holistically as usual in my megabase while doing max Promethean research, so any differences that you will see will seem tiny, considering that I have 9 ships active. Most of them are in the field. It's all the standard spacing out here. But even so, my average update time, the number you see up here next to update, has gone from basically 9.5 to 9 ms. That is fairly substantial. That's like a good 5% overall, with everything else part of the measurement. Like it's, I'm pretty sure the Promethean ships are like a good 5 ms alone, and then at least 3 ms from the other sciences. So it's pretty big. A part of these benefits will of course come from the fact that it's now Q2 science rather than Q1 science, which means that if I look at the hub here, I now only have to transport 4 full belts of science rather than 8 when they were Q1, which means there's actually 100 less bots here over this hub than there used to be. So that's definitely helping. It's hard to quantify exactly how much. And then there's also the rocket costs for that. We're launching half the amount of rockets. But from what is actually measurable in the entity usage, what was visible before and after was inserter and furnace. Furnace, if you don't know, is the prototype class that contains recyclers. So this all makes sense to me because the Hobbit Islands has a lot of, let's look at has a lot of recyclers, 126, 360 stack inserters, whereas these guys here run at 59, but you only need 4 of them as well. So in fact, if you do the maths on that, this has actually saved me 80% of my active recyclers and 30% of my active inserters on Fulgora. It actually amounts to 1,000 recyclers and 1,000 inserters. So, you know, when you just present those numbers, it is absolutely not surprising that this is going to help. But there was also one negative measurement, which is perhaps, well, not super interesting perhaps, but that's the trains themselves, which now show up here. This is basically the worst it gets, 0.12115. And that's, yeah, from these trains themselves. Never used to be high, but I've gained 0.1 millisecond on trains. But that is a fairly small price to pay. And while I don't have like a relative measurement here, it is clear that it's much better than what I had. What I was scared of was that I would hit some particularly unoptimized part of the code base here while related to destroying items, but thankfully that does not seem to be the case, or at least the cost of it is massively outweighed by the amount of recyclers. So this is a holistic assessment, obviously. Feel free to benchmark this in a more structured way. It'd be interesting to see how it performs relative to other islands in a vacuum, even though you can't necessarily trust those numbers. So I'm very happy to see big real-world improvement in my actual base. Blueprints. This blueprint book here will be in the description link. There are some old variants and the current ones in 2 books. If you're going to plant this down, you want to do the crosshair for it first. And plant that down in such a way that you can align up the miners with the scrap islands, and once you plant it, verify that there's actually enough scrap to keep this going for a while. Once you've done that, you can plant the main blueprint down over it. The things you do need to do after placing it is you need to seed this chest here with starter legendary rocket fuel. It makes its own, but not until it's actually started going, so it's necessary. You also need to remember to put bots in these robo networks. All the corners need logistic bots, 510 is fine. The middle network needs construction bots, 20 to 25 is fine. Also make sure you check this, maybe replant this beacon if this inserter is stuck. So that is basically it for this video. Hopefully someone finds this interesting. If you have improvement ideas, I'd love to hear. This has been a slow work in progress for more than one person in the last month. This was basically my brother's design originally. His V1 design that this is based on is this one here. Has a little more sorting silos. And we've slowly been improving on this in the last couple of weeks, to the point where it's now like using very little scrap, and it is just tight within what we need. So I'm posting this here with his permission. We're both interested to see if there are any clear avenues to improve this further. In either case, I hope you have found this useful. I'll have a train to catch now. My name is Klux. Take care.